Welcome back to Saint of the Day. Every day the Church sets before us a window into eternity, and today, July 21st, we begin with a giant of both mind and courage, Saint Lawrence of Brindisi, whose feast we celebrate today. Born Julius Caesar Russo in 1559 in Italy, he was left an orphan while still a boy, and from that early sorrow God drew him into the strict silence of the Capuchin friars. There, in prayer and study, Lawrence's mind blossomed into something almost unbelievable. He mastered Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Syriac, German, and dozens of other languages with total fluency, a gift that would one day earn him the title of Doctor of the Church. But don't picture a man buried only in books. In 1601, Catholic forces stood on the edge of collapse against a crushing Ottoman invasion of Hungary. Lawrence, serving as chaplain, rode into the front lines unarmed, holding nothing but a wooden crucifix, and his fearless presence electrified the troops to a stunning victory. He went on to serve as an ambassador for popes, a counselor to kings, and a peacemaker between nations, wearing out his body in constant fasting and penance until he died on his 60th birthday, remembered for 97 miracles reported in his own lifetime. Saint Lawrence is honored today as a patron of linguists and language students, and his life teaches us that true courage doesn't need a sword, it only needs faith held high. On this very same day, the Church also remembers a very different kind of hero, one who wore a Roman soldier's armor by daylight and became an angel of mercy under cover of night. Saint Victor of Marseille lived in the final years of the 3rd century, when Emperor Maximian unleashed brutal persecution against Christians in what is now France. Victor, an officer in the Roman army, secretly slipped into filthy dungeons to embrace and encourage imprisoned Catholics, urging them to hold fast to their honor before God even in the face of death. When his double life was discovered, he was condemned to horrific torture. Thrown into a dark cell, the presence of God filled it with a dazzling heavenly light and the sound of angelic singing, a wonder witnessed by 3 guards, Longinus, Alexander, and Felician, who fell to their knees, begged for baptism, and were martyred soon after. Brought before a statue of the pagan god Jupiter and ordered to offer sacrifice, Victor answered instead with a single defiant kick that sent the idol crashing down. In fury, the Romans amputated the offending foot and ordered it crushed beneath a millstone, which miraculously split in 2 before he drew his last breath. He was then beheaded for Christ. Saint Victor stands today as a patron of soldiers, and his witness reminds us that mercy shown in secret is never wasted, and that courage before evil is always worth the cost. In a very different way, another daughter of Rome shines on this same date, Saint Praxedes, virgin and comforter of the catacombs, whose feast the Church also keeps today. Praxedes lived in the 2nd century, born into the high nobility of Rome as the daughter of Senator Pudens, a man who had personally heard the preaching of Saint Peter and Saint Paul. Yet Praxedes turned her back on banquets, silk, and imperial wealth to pursue a far greater treasure, gathering up the grief of the faithful in an age when simply being Catholic could mean death in a public square. Alongside her beloved sister, Saint Pudentiana, she transformed the family's great mansion into a hidden church for Christians in hiding. Whenever the cries of martyrdom rose from the arena, Praxedes would quietly rush out to recover the broken bodies of the newly slain martyrs, ensuring each one received a dignified Christian burial. In an act of devotion that has echoed through the centuries, she carried a sponge to the places of execution, tenderly soaking up every last drop of the martyr's precious blood and wringing it into a well inside her own home, the very spot where the Basilica of Santa Praxedes stands in Rome today. Worn out by witnessing so much suffering, she poured out her life in prayer until the Lord finally welcomed her into the glory of paradise, around the year 165. Her example teaches us that even the smallest act of honoring the suffering and the dead is itself a profound work of love. Centuries later, on this same July 21st, the Church honors a missionary whose devotion carried him to the far side of the world, Saint Alberico Crescitelli. This splendid Italian missionary left the comforts of Europe behind for the untamed soil of China at the close of the 19th century. Sent by the Pime Missionary Institute in 1888, he shed every trace of his Western identity, cutting his hair into the traditional Chinese braid and wearing native robes as he crossed the freezing, harsh provinces of Shaanxi, battling famine and opium addiction among the people he served. Then, in the summer of 1900, terror erupted with the bloody Boxer rebellion. Urged to flee as decrees demanded the slaughter of foreign Christians, Alberico refused, seeing flight as a betrayal of the flock entrusted to him. "Not a leaf falls without God's will, I am in his hands," he wrote in one of his final letters. On the night of July 20th, his enemies broke into his refuge with knives and axes, dragging him to a public slaughterhouse where he endured hours of brutal wounds. The next morning, July 21st, they bound his bleeding feet and dragged him over sharp stones to a river, where he was finally beheaded and dismembered. Today he is honored among the 120 martyrs of China, remembered as a patron of missionary perseverance. His life teaches us that true love for others never counts the cost, even when the cost is everything. The Church's calendar today also turns to Germany, and to the sacred stubbornness of Blessed Francis Mary of the Cross Jordan. Born Johann Baptist Jordan in 1848 into a poor household and left an orphan, he had to labor for years with his own hands just to help feed his family, delaying the vocation burning in his heart. But an iron will and God's persistent call carried him through, and a remarkable gift for languages, stretching from Hebrew and Syriac to Arabic, opened doors he never expected. He was ordained a priest on July 21, 1878, precisely the day the Church celebrates him now, right in the middle of Germany's fierce Kulturkampf persecution, which hunted down Catholics and shut down their schools. Jordan traveled to Rome carrying an idea that would change the modern Church, that the priesthood alone was not enough, the whole body of the faithful needed to be awakened to their mission. In a bold move, he founded the Society of the Divine Savior and the Salvatorian Sisters, sending missionaries all the way to India and the Americas, all while living a life of deep gentleness and unceasing prayer before the tabernacle. He once said he could not rest while the world ignored God. He died in 1918, and his path to beatification was sealed by the miraculous healing of an unborn baby in Brazil. His life reminds us that a delayed vocation is never a lost one. On this same day, the Church also honors an ordinary layman whose witness needed no theology book to prove its power, Saint Joseph Wang Yume. He was an elderly Catholic father in the quiet village of Majiazhuang in 19th-century China, a man who had raised his children in the Catholic faith. In 1900, he and his family were seized during the violent uprisings of the Boxer Rebellion, which sought to wipe out every baptized Christian in the country. Crowded into a small room in the village on July 21, 1900, the insurgents coldly told the gathered Catholics that anyone unwilling to keep worshipping their foreign god could simply step into the next room and be spared. As the undisputed leader and pillar of virtue of his family at 68 years old, Joseph showed no fear. He flatly refused to deny his Catholic faith and was killed immediately for his honor. His unwavering integrity became the spark for the sacrifice of dozens of others present that day. Inspired by his courage, his own daughter-in-law and his small, smiling grandson Andrew offered their necks to the blade the very next morning. Saint Joseph Wang Yume teaches us that the quiet, steady faith of a grandfather or father can be the very thing that gives an entire family the courage to be faithful unto death. In a very different way, the Church also remembers one of the strangest and most astonishing saints on her calendar today, Saint Simeon Salos, the desert hermit of the 6th century who hid heavenly gifts beneath the mask of madness for the love of Christ. Born into a wealthy Syrian family, Simeon abandoned every trace of aristocratic pride to spend 30 years in fasting and penance in the deadly wastelands near the Dead Sea. Having conquered his pride and fallen ever deeper in love with Christ, he received a call from God to return to the bustling city of Emesa to rescue souls in danger. But fearing the applause his miraculous gifts might bring him, he chose total disguise as a fool for Christ. He shocked the citizens by dragging a rotting dog's carcass through the city gates, ate garbage, insulted the respectable, and disrupted solemn liturgies with absurd antics, often earning whippings from the crowds who despised him. What no one understood was the wonder unfolding in secret. Unseen by the wise of this world, he quietly healed the outcast, cast out demons from the most tormented corners of the city, and walked among prostitutes and the condemned, gently leading them back to repentance. Saint Simeon's strange holiness teaches us that God's greatest work is often hidden from human eyes, and that true humility asks for no credit at all. The Church's celebration today also crosses into the forests of early medieval Europe, where the spiritual dawn of the continent owes much to Saint Arbogast. An Irish-born hermit of the 7th century, he traveled deep into the wild Alsatian forest and built his humble dwelling among the roots of a great oak tree. Word of his wisdom spread until it reached the court of the Frankish king Dagobert II, who raised him to the dignity of Bishop of Strasbourg. During his time as bishop, Arbogast faced the depths of grief when he was brought the body of the young royal heir, Sigebert, mortally wounded by a wild boar during a royal hunt. Overcome with pastoral love, he threw himself in prayer over the boy's body, and the young prince was restored to life, filling the whole region with wonder and joy. Knowing that no earthly throne compares to heaven, Arbogast insisted in his final hour, in the year 678, that no bishop's pomp accompany his funeral, asking instead to be buried, in glorious humility, among the graves of executed criminals. His life shows us that greatness in God's eyes often looks like the opposite of greatness in the eyes of the world. On this same July 21st, the Church also honors a martyr forged amid the flames of the French Revolution's reign of terror, Blessed Gabriel Purgaud. In 1794, when the merciless revolutionary tribunals demanded that every priest break communion with the Pope under threat of the guillotine, Gabriel Purgaud, prior of the Abbey of Beaulieu, refused to bow to the state schism. Condemned and driven from his monastery, he was consigned to slow starvation aboard the horrifying floating prisons known as the pontoons of Rochefort, decommissioned slave ships where hundreds of priests and religious wasted away from paralysis, typhus, and scurvy in suffocating conditions. In that floating hell, this great soul turned every rotting timber into a corner of heaven, spending his final breaths comforting his fellow prisoners and quietly leading continual prayer to Christ amid the worst horror and disease imaginable, until he too was crowned with the glory of martyrdom alongside dozens of fellow priests. Blessed Gabriel teaches us that fidelity to the Church can cost everything, and that even in the darkest, most forgotten places, love for others can still shine like a candle. Finally, on this same day, we come to the fury of the Spanish Civil War in July of 1936, and to one of the pioneering stars of the Church in Spain, Blessed Agricola Rodriguez Garcia de los Huertos, Doctor of Theology. Rejecting the honors of university life, he chose instead to humbly serve the flock of the village of Mora, in Toledo, rising every morning before dawn to pray before the Blessed Sacrament ahead of his parish duties. When armed anarchy swept the country and revolutionary militias approached his church, left defenseless after the civil guard had withdrawn, the devoted priest embraced the cross in the most sublime way. Finding militiamen trying to force their way into the church, where terrified families were hiding, he opened the door himself and offered his own life on one condition, that they not touch the innocent people inside. The militiamen accepted the trade, saying, "We only came for you, walk on ahead." Agricola walked 10 steps away from the church doors before being cut down by gunfire, shedding his blood for his own parishioners and becoming the proto-martyr of the religious persecution in Toledo. And so we close today's journey through the saints of July 21st. If any of these stories moved you, we invite you to follow and subscribe to Saint of the Day, to leave a comment asking one of these saints' intercession for someone you love, and to share this video with anyone who might need to hear one of these stories today, because every single share like that is truly a small act of evangelization. The full prayer to each of today's saints is waiting for you in the description below.